This happened when I was 22, working as a delivery driver for a small local pizza place. It was a job I picked up to make extra money while finishing school. Most nights were uneventful. Drop off pizzas, get a tip, move on. It was late October, and the weather had been awful all day. Non-stop rain, cold wind, and just that gloomy gray sky that makes everything feel off. My shift was almost over, and I was looking forward to getting home when the manager handed me one last order: a large pepperoni pizza for a house way out on the edge of town. The house was in a more rural area, surrounded by woods, with no neighbors for miles. I wasn't thrilled about the drive, especially in the pouring rain, but it was my job, so I headed out. The further I drove, the more isolated it felt. The rain was coming down in sheets, and my GPS struggled to keep its signal. I almost missed the turn onto a narrow dirt road that led to the house. The road was full of potholes and surrounded by towering trees that swayed in the wind. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the only sound was the rain hitting the roof of my car. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the house. It was a 2-story building, old and run down, with peeling paint and a sagging porch. There were no lights on inside, just a faint glow from the front porch light, which flickered like it was about to burn out. I parked in the muddy driveway, grabbed the pizza, and ran to the door, trying not to get soaked. I knocked a couple of times and waited. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed the curtain in one of the front windows move, just a little, like someone was peeking out but didn't want to be seen. I called out "pizza delivery," hoping they'd hear me over the rain. After a few more seconds, the door creaked open. Standing there was a man, probably in his 50s, wearing an old flannel shirt and jeans. His hair was messy and his face was pale, almost sickly. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me. Your pizza," I said, holding it out to him. He reached out and took it but didn't step aside or invite me in. Instead, he asked, "Can you help me with something?" Something about his tone changed suddenly. It wasn't a request, it was almost like a demand. "I'm sorry, I can't," I said quickly. "I've got other deliveries to make." He stared at me for a moment longer, then said, "Wait here." Before I could say anything, he shut the door. I stood there, the rain soaking through my jacket, completely creeped out. I decided I wasn't sticking around. I turned to leave, but as I walked back to my car, I heard something. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by the rain, but it sounded like a muffled scream. I stopped and listened, thinking maybe I imagined it. But then I heard it again, this time louder. It was coming from the house. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my curiosity got the better of me. I turned back toward the house and saw that the man had left the door slightly open. From where I stood, I could see a dim hallway with peeling wallpaper and shadows dancing from a flickering light bulb. I took a step closer, and that's when I noticed something in the driveway, footprints in the mud. But they weren't mine. They were fresh, leading around the side of the house. I froze. The sound of the scream came again, louder this time, and I realized it wasn't muffled. It was coming from inside the house. That was enough for me. I ran back to my car, jumped in, and locked the doors. As I started the engine, I glanced at the house one last time. The front door was now wide open, and the man was standing in the doorway, watching me. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, in the shadows, I could make out another figure. It was smaller, hunched over, and its head was tilted at an unnatural angle. It wasn't moving, just standing there staring at me. I didn't wait to find out what was going on. I floored it, spraying mud everywhere as I sped down the dirt road. My heart was racing the entire drive back, and I couldn't stop looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights chasing me. When I got back to the pizza place, I told my manager what happened. He looked concerned, but didn't seem shocked. He said that house had ordered from us a few times before, and the drivers always came back with weird stories. This happened a couple of years ago when I decided to take a solo trip over the holidays. I had been working non-stop and thought a quiet getaway would be the perfect way to recharge. I found a cabin online. It was small, cozy, and tucked away deep in the woods, about 2 hours from where I lived. The pictures made it look like something out of a Christmas postcard, with snow-covered trees and a warm glow from the fireplace inside. But when I arrived, the weather had taken a turn. Instead of snow, there was a cold, relentless rain that soaked everything. The cabin itself was fine, clean, with basic amenities. But being alone out there with the storm raging made the place feel different, isolated. The first night went by without much happening. I made dinner, watched some movies on my laptop, and listened to the rain pounding on the roof. It was peaceful at first, but as the hours dragged on, the quietness of the woods started to feel unsettling. By the second night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started with the knocking. I was lying on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a soft knock at the front door. I froze. It wasn't loud, more like a light tap, but it was deliberate. I got up slowly, peering through the curtains. The porch light was on, and the rain was still coming down in sheets, but I couldn't see anyone out there. Probably just the wind, I told myself, though I wasn't fully convinced. I sat back down, but the knocking started again, this time on one of the side windows. My heart started racing. The window was partially obscured by curtains, but from where I was sitting, I could see the faint outline of something, or someone, standing just beyond the glass. I grabbed a flashlight and mustered up the courage to look. When I shined the light toward the window, there was nothing there, just rain streaking down the glass. Trying to shake off the unease, I checked all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked. Then I went to bed, hoping it was just my imagination. That's when things got worse. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the porch. They were slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. I stayed perfectly still. Then came the sound of the doorknob jiggling. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but before I could hit call, the sound stopped. Everything went silent, except for the rain. I waited a few minutes, then crept toward the front door as quietly as I could. When I looked through the peephole, I saw nothing. But when I opened the door just a crack to peek outside, I saw it, a set of muddy footprints leading from the porch to the woods. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I locked the door again and decided I wasn't staying there another night. I packed my things as fast as I could, threw them in my car, and started driving back toward the highway. The rain made the dirt road slippery, and I had to go slow. My nerves were shot, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone chasing after me. About 15 minutes into the drive, I passed a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a man, soaked from head to toe, just standing there in the rain. He just stared at me as I drove by. I didn't stop. When I finally got to the main road, I pulled over to catch my breath. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I couldn't get enough air. That's when I noticed something. There was a wet handprint on the outside of my driver's side window. I hadn't stopped the car since leaving the cabin. I don't know who or what was out there that night, but I never went back to that cabin, and I don't plan on taking any more solo trips. Sometimes, peace and quiet isn't worth the risk. It was the summer of 2017. I was 19 years old, driving home late at night from my girlfriend's house. She lived about 40 miles away, in a rural area where the roads were barely lit, and traffic was non-existent after dark. That night, a thunderstorm had rolled in out of nowhere. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering my windshield, and the wipers were doing their best to keep up. Visibility was terrible. I remember how the storm seemed louder than it should have been, the rain hitting my car like tiny pebbles. The occasional flash of lightning lit up the dense trees on either side of the road, and it felt like the night stretched on forever. I had about 20 miles left to go when my GPS notified me of a detour. Apparently, the main road was closed for construction. The new route took me down an unfamiliar, narrow road that snaked through the woods. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I didn't have much of a choice. The further I drove, the worse the storm got. My tires splashed through deep puddles, and I had to slow down to avoid losing control. The road was completely deserted. No other cars, no houses, no signs of life. Just the sound of rain, my engine, and the occasional rumble of thunder. Then, as I rounded a bend, My headlights illuminated something in the road ahead. At first, I thought it was an animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. A woman, standing right in the middle of the road. She wasn't waving or moving, just standing there, drenched from head to toe, with her head tilted slightly to one side. She was wearing a long dress, tattered and muddy, clinging to her like she'd been out in the rain for hours. I hit the brakes hard, my tires skidding slightly before the car stopped about 10 feet away from her. My heart was racing, and for a moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. She didn't move. She didn't try to get out of the way. She just stared at me. My first thought was that maybe she'd been in an accident or needed help. I rolled down the window just a crack, not wanting to get soaked. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" I called out. No response. She just stood there, her face pale and her eyes locked on mine. Something about her expression sent a chill down my spine. I decided to get out of there. I shifted into reverse, but before I could back up, she started walking toward my car. Slowly. I panicked. I threw the car into drive and swerved around her. In my rearview mirror, I saw her turn to face me, her figure disappearing into the rain as I rounded the next curve. I tried to shake it off, telling myself she was probably just some crazy person or someone stranded in the storm. But a few miles later, as I started to relax, I noticed something. My rearview mirror wasn't empty. There was a shadow in my back seat. For a split second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then, lightning flashed, and I saw it clearly. A figure hunched in the corner of the back seat. I slammed on the brakes. I twisted around in my seat, but the back seat was empty. I sat there, frozen, listening to the rain battering the roof of my car, and every nerve in my body was on edge. After a few moments, I forced myself to keep driving, convinced I was just spooked. When I finally got home, I parked in the driveway and bolted inside without looking back. I didn't even bother grabbing my bag from the passenger seat. For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about that woman. I didn't tell anyone about what I thought I saw in the back seat. It sounded too crazy.